First, some announcements. My first upload to makelovenotporn.com is officially live. It went up a few days ago, and you can rent it for viewing for a period of up to a week. And my second video upload should be on my new channel there soon enough. To once again reiterate, for those who don't know, I'm no longer active on Pornhub, as well, I've been pseudo-blocked from accessing any ability to upload or edit my content, or even edit descriptions on my channel there. And I left a comment on the last video I made on there about how I believe you can fall romantically in love in so much as a day, where I talked about that. And yeah, my content on makelovenotporn.com as of right now will not be near as long, and it will not be as in-depth in terms of any form of commentary, in accordance with the platform's policies as of right now. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about that, but I will still try and maintain as best I can the style of the content, or of my pornographic content, as best as I have before doing so. So there's that announcement. 2 is I've started a GoFundMe fundraiser for myself. Why? Because in recent times, as many of you know, I've had difficulty finding physical employment. That has changed now, but, well, since being here now in Quebec City, my funds have been very, very low. As of recent, my total, the total amount in my bank accounts as of right now is roughly $312 left. So I've started a GoFundMe, specifically, as the description will state on it, for helping provide finance for me, for my travels, for all my excursions. If you enjoy what I do, as in terms of my work and my actions, if you support it, then you can donate any amount that you feel. The goal that I've set it for is $7,000 and $7,016, because there's deduction fees per each donation on the actual platform, how it operates. But with now me also having physical employment here in the city, thankfully, if it gets closer to that goal before, well, any amount of donations fulfill that request, or if miraculously it was able to quickly reach that goal from given donations to me, I am either going to close the fundraiser as immediately as possible once $7,000 $16 is reached, again, I'm going to close it once my bank account reaches that or close to that, or depending on how much I make over the summer, close enough to it is fine, and either way I'll shut it off so that you can no longer put funds into it. Or if I'm not able to temporarily close it, I will just delete my account on it, and thus hopefully delete the fundraiser until I need it again in the future, and I'll just make another one. And I'll try to continue that going forward. So I'll also make a community post here on the channel about that if you want to go to it. My name on there isn't a damn slice of cake, it's just my real name, Cam Weinstein. But my profile picture is the red velvet cake. So you should be able to find it. And again, there's no pressure to anyone who is in financial strife as well. If you are, just give what you are able to give. Don't feel any obligation to do so. And if you do have a stable enough net worth, and you know that you do have the ability to donate an amount, well, and you choose not to, well, then you're morally deplorable. So, but for those who know that it'd be tight for them, no pressure to donate, just whatever amount you can give, or if you can't give any, that's fine. And the third announcement is that, yes, I have, thankfully, in the now week and a half of me being here in Quebec City, Quebec, Canada, I have managed to gain a job, yes, at a small business restaurant. It is in the district of the city as well that I've been staying in since my arrival, and it's been going rather well overall. I got my first paycheck from them yesterday. It wasn't a lot because it's going on a bi-weekly basis, and apparently payments for the week of pay rollout, that'll be on the next check whenever that comes in. But so it wasn't a lot for this week, but it'll be more with the hours that I've thankfully been able to get from them. They've been giving me a lot, and I'm more than happy to help out at the place in what ways I can. It's a bagel bakery, or predominantly a bagel themed bakery style restaurant, and more so breakfast or brunch style foods that are predominantly Canadian style breakfast foods. A lot, and those specifically with Quebecois influence, as the bagels that we make are predominantly Montreal style bagels. So yes, I'm very happy with that. So some amount of stability. So anyway, that was announcements out of the way, and let's get into the actual topic of this video. Did I position myself for the entire first 10 minutes of this little introduction for that face reveal? Yes, I absolutely did, and I have absolutely no regrets about it. Be quiet. So, what's the main ranting point for the content today? Well, you read the title. It's pretty direct, but I'll reiterate it. Given recent events of the world, but just to further somewhat go into sentiments that I've expressed from my own personal political viewpoints here on the channel, just online in general in the past. Well, I want to discuss this issue that is overlooked, but the left wing of the political spectrum, the far left wing, is steeped in, despite what they will deny. And that is the absolute rise. I wonder if I should even call it rise. No, not really, not so much the rise, but just the pseudo-intellectualism that is a part of the far left, or the far left wing. And how it has manifested itself in various forms, and how highly destructive it is. Now, I've already talked about this, in essence, a plethora of times on my channel. And as well in my theoretical work, in the essence of what I discuss in it. But just how the current state of the world is right now, and when I say the current state of the world, I mean the current state of the focused on atrocities in the mass media, how it is right now, more so. I finally want to be more direct with my issues with extremist leftism. Coming from the perspective of a leftist themselves. Consider myself a rising leftist. So let's start with so to lead into this, let's start with that there. So often, whenever somebody criticizes the far left, in any shape or form, with ideological values that are actually have been intrinsically a part of them for centuries, since their outlining of various ideologies, philosophies within the category would have been considered to be the category of far left on the spectrum. Here is one immediate thing that is noticeable. Any amount of critique or full-blown criticism of actions, moral actions, and furthermore, the ideologic values behind those actions, to some degree or another, that are a part of their sphere, will be immediately labeled by the far left as right-wing. Or to put it more specifically, any argument against points being made or actions taken by ideological groups, demographics that are politically considered far left, are immediately labeled as anti-leftist. In terms of the intellectual discourse of the further extreme side of the left wing, it is so often a apparent stance that any argument made against even so much as one factor towards a methodology or a moral value, even if the intention behind said value is considerably beneficial, is any amount, I see this all the time, is always considered to be anti-leftist. There's no possibility in these demographics, in these organizations. I'm not going to go into naming all of them because there's, quite frankly, and historically, there has been far too many to name. And I honestly, they can't all come to the top of my head right now. But too often, they are immediate and reactionary enough to consider any amount of defaming, any amount of disagreement towards their actions, regardless of the reasoning behind their actions, to immediately view it as the argument being presented not a leftist argument at all. It can only be a right-wing argument. It's always the case, especially in times of high political tension, in terms of especially in westernized protests in the Western world, or even in the westernized countries of the Eastern world. Often, the sides that are being taken are completely coming from a philosophical stance of absolutism. That's another prominent thing amongst the far left and the far right and the extremist center. But the newsflash, anyone watching this who's immediately getting uncomfortable, who identifies as a far leftist and is immediately getting uncomfortable with what I'm saying here, well, just a heads up, there's going to be far more criticism of your side of the political spectrum than there is going to be of the far right and the extremist center. But don't worry, I will criticize them as well, as I always do. I always try to. Because make no mistake, as I agree with you, they are deplorable. They are the cause of they're the initial cause of, well, the right wing is the initial cause of the world's problems. But where I'm coming at here is from an idea that you help perpetuate the problem. So just a heads up, if you want to click off the video and leave it a dislike and not listen to a frivolous bit of what I have to actually say. So that is one immediate thing that is noticeable. What examples could I give of this? Of the absolutist mentality of the far left? Well, here, give me a second, let me think. Okay, alright, so let's go with the one that I can immediately think of, as I have discussed this myself, specifically in conversations with friends of mine in the past who claim to be left-wing. I'm kind of suspicious of that, but let's go with this one in regards to the working class, the proletariat, fighting against or trying to oppose capitalist enforcement of a controlling economic system. There are members of the far left, or who identify as being a part of the far left, predominantly those in university and post-secondary schooling, who will actively defend why they are those who end up going towards working either for moderate corporations or mega corporate branches, or even small businesses, but they will defend their work position of how, on the grounds of how often they work there, what's a good way I can word this? How often they abide by the policy enforcement of the company they work for. So often there will be a lot of justification for following in the guidelines and regulations of a corporation that far leftists, demographic predominantly in younger far leftist post-secondary schooling, roughly, or high school, who will defend not going against in their place of work when morally corrupt, provably morally corrupt by their ideological stance. Morally corrupt principles are at play with the tasks they are given to do, or that they're expected to do, or are demanded that they follow through with, even with no real actual amount of corporate check-in to see if they're actually following these policies. There will often be a strict defense of abiding by the regulated policies of a corporation that they work under, no matter the size, or even just so much as working under the oppressive control of a mega corporate enterprise or a moderate corporate enterprise, in terms of either expansionism, or in terms of expansionism and net growth, or just solely net growth if the company it doesn't have multiple locations for whatever industry it's in, but it just has amalgamated a mass amount of profit from the services it has provided and paradeals it has negotiated through. There will be a defense of following through with the company's regulations on their part wholeheartedly, with no real giveaway at all, under the guise, under the grounds, convinced grounds, I shouldn't say guys, they're the wrong word, under the convinced idea that we have no choice, or that the working class doesn't have any choice, or members like us, the working class, we don't have any other choice but to abide by these oppressive rules. No, you do. Okay, from my own philosophical standpoint, I already believe, and I've said this before, that every human being has a choice. The choice is not a good word for the decisions made here, because you are in control of your decisions, no matter what external influences in terms of the philo-psychological state, whatever external stimuli psychologically formulates your morality. It's still your choice. A word that needs to be replaced with choice for, if you are defending your point here on this, is option. You might not have any other option. You don't have, given a certain scenario, you don't have another option to do anything else, to abide by a more ethical principle. But you do have a choice. So that's one thing. But here's the key thing. Regardless of whether you say in terms of semantics, whether you say the word in the English language for me or the equivalent in any other language in terms of linguistics of the human race, equivalent for option and choice, whatever it is, whatever semantics you use, in this defense, most often, realistically, these people do have another option. They do. There is too much of a defense of corporate policy enforcement, and going a bit further than that in terms of leftist libertarian or anarchistic moral principles. There is a defense of abiding by the legal system in collusion with the private sector. There is a defense of utilizing police forces, as well as there's as I consider to be a problematic defense of systematic healthcare regulation or other emergency service such as fire departments or social worker groups, things of the sort. There's already, I feel, a problematic defense here, but let's specifically go with the main one that is focused on in anarchist thought, and that is of police enforcement, militant control. There is too often in this same, and I'm grouping this in because it's usually the same demographic, high school to post-secondary far leftists, those within the category of leaning leftism. There is this defense of utilizing police forces for controlling or just of maintaining a situation if something's getting out of hand, or if there's an intense situation that has come about in the society, in the societal settings around you, interpersonal, and in that interpersonally as well, for trying to help something, trying to aid something. There's this defense as if the police will help. I've heard this way too often. There's a bashing of police forces ideologically, which I'm completely for, being a social anarchist. And they are completely right in the observations of the inherent methods of control for police, that policing as a systemic force is not for protection and safety, but it is inherently, on the ideology of legalism, is inherently for control of a populace. They're completely right in that. But then will unnecessarily, as far as I'm concerned, contradict themselves by, once a genuine threat to their safety, or the safety of someone they know, is thrust towards them, call the police. Hold on a moment. So for both corporate policy control and governmental legal control, despite the ideological opposition to it, more often than not, there will be a conformity to it. And I really am honing in on the point, or trying to, of more than necessary. Because realistically, as I think my entire lifestyle has proven up until this point, you can quit working for that mega corporate to moderate corporate entity. You can, and it's especially disheartening to me when these leftists don't try and do so first, when they don't try and actually look at smaller businesses for needed employment for an amount of financial gain in a capitalist ecopolitical system, when there's no real attempt, when you actually ask around these different people who identify as such politically, you find out that there's really no attempt that's actually been made to go towards smaller enterprises, smaller companies that aren't heavily expansionist, that aren't heavily the main predicator of mass resource extraction, and aren't and haven't amalgamated a mass amount of profit gain. That there's really been no attempt to go this route first. Like, as far as I'm concerned, if you actually want to claim the moral values of leftism, especially in regards to socialistic, communistic ideals economically, then I think that you shouldn't be going towards moderate to mega corporations at all. But some amount of a semblance of argument to a point where you're pushed into desperation, then those should be your last options, your absolute final options. And I don't mean like you went and put your resume at maybe 5 small businesses, they never called you back, so fuck it, I went to work at Walmart. No, go all over your municipality. If you live in a city, a town, or a village, go to every lower net growth company that you can in your local area to make sure that you have no other actual option. And as for the judicial portion of this argument and legality, you need to leave, if you're an anarchist, you need to leave police out of the equation of any intensive scenario at all. As far as I'm concerned, that's the only ethically sound way to be an anarchist. And the only way you can make an argument for police involvement or militant involvement in any way, intervention in some systematic force, and holding leftist principles in terms of the leftist side of the spectrum, is if you were a leftist libertarian. That's the only time, and even then, that is arguing and to be in line with the libertarian ideal, arguing for the minimalistic amount of policing, a most minimal sector of law enforcement. That's the only way that you can argue that. So in that regard, police intervention in any intensive scenario should be your absolute final option. Absolute final. So there's that example I could give. What's another one? Let me think again. Okay, I have another one in my head, another example that is related to the absolutist mentality, but I just want to put in another bit here for the whole defense of private policy and legal policy by many far leftists in modern society. There's often as well, in terms of workforce employment, this defense of, well, for abiding by the oppressive policies, executive rule of a company, that we're just doing our jobs. Well, by that logic, police brutality, military invasion, troops that are deployed by large superpowers of the world into foreign nations for puppet state setting up and resource extraction intervention and purposefully creating disasters so that economic inflation rises because of conflict in the region. I guess that was 3. All that, or politicians, their authoritarian exactment of legislative, executive branches, them being the final decisive factor to actually implementing legalized force, they're all just doing their jobs. By that same logic, if you're going to defend the fact that you are abiding by an oppressive system because we're just doing our jobs and we don't have another option, then by your logic, all those oppressive forces, they're just doing their jobs, and maybe in some regard they don't have another option as well, if you're going with that, again, with the whole example I just gave. Okay, but now here's another absolutist defense that I can think of. This is very common amongst reactionary leftism. And it's common amongst it's very common amongst the performative leftists, which I don't even, that term, okay, performative leftists, I've used it before. Okay, first off, when I say that, I don't mean leftists. Performative leftists are rightists. They're far rightists, and I should just be calling them probably rightists, but it's just to make a note of who these people are, more so, in terms of the false personas they adorn. But in terms of those who are sincere with their gained moral values in terms of far leftism, which is who I'm speaking at here. Another bout of absolutist ideological cultural mentality is that of the complete and total defense, seems no matter what, the complete and total defense of globally minority cultures, specifically minority cultures that have been harshly oppressed by right-wing forces. In that regard, actually, that have completely formed, some entirely have completely formed out of the rightist oppression. This is a big one, and I see this all the time, and I really want to hone in on that wording, because I mean that specifically. This complete and utter defense of the cultural traditions, the cultural identity of oppressed demographics, no matter what. This is very, I notice this a lot in my psychosociological observations from just being on the internet. This is especially apparent on the internet. You can find it in the drummed up tourists in the modern day from neoliberal fascist performative activism in the infrastructurally funded touristic areas for the false promotion of minority cultures in the West, or just even if they're not a minority, oppressed cultures. Because realistically, okay, who I'm gonna describe, then it's not a minority. They're all over the globe, in every facet of life. But you can find this in the cityscapes, in these tourist promoted areas as well, as I've showcased in my exploration series. All of them. But it's more so apparent in online discourse. There is, because of the years of oppression towards groups such as non-white ethnicities, the LGBTQ+, non-Christian religious identities, that one's somewhat kind of dwindling somewhat, but it's still pervasive. And well, I got another one here. What is it? It's main 4. Main 4. What is it? Disability. Those who have a psychiatric or physiological disability. So in relation to these 4 things, you throw in children as well for ageism, but I'll get to that in a bit. More so, it's these 4 things. These 4 sectors of sociology that you could look at. Race and ethnicity, LGBTQ+, religion, religious identities, spiritual identities, and physical ailments, physical disabilities. So, in more specific regards to oppression, in trying to dismantle racism, homophobia, transphobia, agenderphobia, or just genderism, or sexuality prejudice in general, beliefism, or specific prejudice towards Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Hinduism or Hinduphobia, things like this, and ableism. So these 4. There is so extensively, again, predominantly amongst younger far left identifying individuals, there is, without any real thought put into it, gonna be honest, any real thought, induced critical thinking here towards actually observing the cultural phenomena that has come about across these intersecting demographics, to the point where the only... Okay, let me gather my words here for a second. Okay, so the only real... The best way that I can just put it is that the far left will completely defend any and all traditional practices of these 4 people demographics, even if what has culturally come about in a traditionalist sense is very clearly morally deplorable. And one way that will be key to either defending it or just not having the courage to hold an opinion on a different demographic is idea that it's not your people group, therefore it's not your right socially to talk about it, or it's not your right to hold an opinion on that. I think that's complete malarkey, but I'll get into that more later. That's one way. But let me just give some specific examples to again demonstrate what I mean. Okay, let's say for the modern era, rap and hip-hop culture. It has become a widespread global phenomenon since coming out of the 1970s during the rise of the hip-hop movement in music, which formed out of the original dub music era. Dub and beat, I think, was the genre in terms of black musicians in the 1950s, and which evolved further out from enslaved plantation worker musical traditions that had been carried over from Western and Eastern Africa during chattel enslavement and the Atlantic slave trade. That's the further history of it. Going to the modern day, where it has skyrocketed into popularity after movements from the 1970s into the 1990s, big musical hip-hop and rap and an R&B revolution in the 1990s, which has now solidified the three different genres places in the mega corporates, or in the music industry just in general. It's in small music culture as well. But let's specifically look at the mega corporate mass music industry in terms of the corporate record labels and they shouldn't even really be called record labels by this point, but more so just the corporate music producers. There is performative push for black artists, and predominantly and specifically in terms of North American rap and hip-hop music, black and Hispanic ethnic descent individuals, artists in the genre. There is push of that performatively. Whether the artists are, in my opinion, good artists or poor artists, regardless, there's promotion of that. The far left sphere will often completely defend the mass corporate promotion in the music industry of this genre. They'll defend the neoliberal fascist policies again, and in that, hold on, let me gather my thoughts. They will defend this business push. So that's what it is. They will defend this under the assumption that it is promoting authentic black culture. They will also, sadly, there are many who will defend the large celebritized individuals in the rap and hip-hop industry who are predominantly cis men, black cis men, who, how do I put this, are the epitome of internalized racism, the epitome of toxic masculinity, the epitome of narcissistic personality disorder. You get the point. And yes, I'm referring to a specific recent controversy. If you look at the time date, if you look at the date of when this is uploaded, yes, I'm referring to a certain recent controversy. I'm not gonna say what, because I literally discussed this in the comments section of one of my videos, 2 videos ago, from this. Briefly. They will defend gangster thematic artistry, this promotion of gangster ideologic culture that has been commodified and has been pushed into the hip-hop genre since the early 2000s, more so. That promotes this stereotypical ideal of black masculinity and will defend it on the idea that this is just authentic, that these artists are just rapping and writing lyrical work about their authentic experience in the black community, growing up in the ghetto areas of whatever country they have lived in, being pushed into poverty, being severely oppressed in the educational systems, being dehumanized for attire that is culturally common within the demographics, within the ethnic groups they are part of in the black diaspora, yada yada yada, things of the sort. When, as far as I'm concerned, that is unequivocally completely wrong and nonsense, as not only does that promote the idea that gangster culture is black culture or Hispanic culture in terms of, or Latino culture, within the groups that have been promoted in the industry, which it's not at all. And yes, yeah, that's it. That's my point. This is an example I'm giving. This is and I have heard this argument. In essence, I have heard this defense of the highly toxic, mega corporate, celebritized rap and hip hop industry by far leftists, those who identify as far leftists and ideologically do hold values of the far left, many times, more times than I obviously would like. This defense of, and not just within the corporate hip-hop world, but just in the cultural presence of the black community, the Hispanic community, the Latino community as a whole. Just complete defense of it, of these, of misogynistic values, dehumanization of cis women, specifically cis black, Hispanic, and Latino women, by cis black, Hispanic, and Latino men, internalized misogyny of women in these demographics who sadly have taken on the presentations of toxic masculine presentation, have pandered to patriarchy and adopted these ideals. And these, in this regard to gangster culture, ideologic culture, this highly malicious, sociopathic, egocentric, these personality traits. There is a defense of this. And it's very, very disturbing. It's very disturbing. Because not only... Because one, it's downright wrong. And I'm not speaking just morally there. I'm speaking factually. Well, morally is factually. I'm speaking in terms of the cultural presence. This idea that that is what black culture is, and I'm specifically honing in on for black culture. One, that's just wrong. That's not truthful. That's not true. That's a complete stereotype. And this promotes the moral value of those within the community adorning and praising these actions, which I think is disgusting. So, and for those who might be arguing that this is a small portion of the far left, no, it's not. Like, you haven't spent a lot of time... One, you haven't spent a lot of time online, clearly. You clearly also haven't spent a lot of time at looking into... I don't spend a lot of time either physically, but I look into the culture, the ideologic culture of universities and colleges of the world and the academic circles of far leftism. You haven't spent a lot of time looking into it in the modern era, if you believe that it's a small portion who believe this. Okay, so that's one example for that. The promotion of gangster culture by the far left in the rap and hip-hop industry. Another one for complete defense of oppressed cultures. What's another one? Let me see if I can get it to come to my head without taking a minute to pause the actual footage. Oh, here's another one. Okay, let's go now towards, speaking of misogyny and also, in this regard, misandry. Let's go towards the complete and total defense of women's actions, or cis women's actions of all backgrounds, culturally. The complete and total defense to cis women being in any amount of sexual encounter or romantic relationship, or both, having complete and total, or being given complete and total power control. I don't have another way to put it right now. I'm trying not to pause it. The words coming to my head. Complete and total... Yeah, okay. More praise towards women having complete and total control over a relationship. Let's put it that way. I'll elaborate on that, but let's just... The briefest way I can put it, let's put it that way. Whether it is in any sort of... Whether it's in a heteroromantic or heterosexual relationship, or a non-heteroromantic or non-heterosexual relationship. That is part of the LGBTQ+. There is a complete defense of sexually women having the right and the moral right and ability to defame cis men or other women in a relationship for not being comfortable with. Okay, let's stay in the realm specifically right now. What I'm got on the top of my head of sexuality, not being comfortable with certain actions, and thinking that all decisions made in a relationship of two or more people should solely come down to the female partner in a dynamic. This can even apply to, this can also apply to platonic relationships. And in that, condoning shaming cis men for having the opinion that that's not morally right, that it should be shared equality between decision making, or defaming that stance as being inherently misogynistic. No. There is this idea that because of the years of patriarchal domination in a majority of the world towards women, that in a relationship of any kind, or just in terms of actions of women in any sort of political activism, that presenting an idea or to help aid the actions or what is trying to be sought after, or claiming that here's what I was trying to find more. Yes, all of what I just said is the general basis of what I'm getting at, but there's one specifically, the word, it wasn't coming into my head for a second. What I specifically want to say, the defamation of masculine traits in a culture, provably non-problematic masculine traits in terms of gender expression, regarding, in terms of defense of the far left, regarding masculine traits as being inherently detrimental, but feminine traits as being inherently positive in all forms of what has culturally been associated to said gender identities or physicalities, but I'm more so going with gender expression in terms of persona of what I'm talking about. There's this idea that there's this subtle idea that a matriarchy would be better than a patriarchy. As far as I'm concerned, that's absolutely nonsense. Patriarchy just simply means male domination of a predominant aid towards masculine issues and complete tailoring of social dynamics towards that of male gender in a society. The same is for a matriarchy, just with all of the above being tailored towards the female gender in a society. People seem to think that there's something different with the matriarchy, that it is more compassionate, more reasonable, more rational. This is completely wrong. As if that is inherent to feminine traits. Well, no, that's mainly in terms of Western culture, and in that mass years of white supremacist oppression, as far as I'm concerned, and European gender traditions. That is what is, in many regards, in terms of Western European culture, been associated to said gender dynamics. This is not the same for the entire world. That has been for various other demographics across the globe. But there in the modern day is this defamation towards masculinity that, because of the rise of the, I'm gonna say the word, I don't want to, but the manosphere. You know when a term becomes so damn overused, you hate saying it, and it just sounds ridiculous with everything because of everything it's been associated to? Yeah, that's it. That's how I feel about the manosphere. The insulistic misogynists of the internet. The right-wing patriarchal domineers of the online world. Because of this and the terms of the business sector, corporate defamation of femininity, the religious defamation of femininity in various religions across the world, and all this influencing a cultural presence of, for centuries, women as being viewed, or those with feminine reproductive organs who aren't of cis female gender, physiologically or in terms of or expression. This idea that because of differentiation of bodily function, which is really disgusting. It really is disgusting how, well, women are dehumanized, that they are lesser human beings, that they are inferior, and that they need to be regulated by male rationality. I'll put it that way. This is where the reactionary far-left ideal in terms of feminism that has come about, that predominantly masculine associated gender qualities in various societies are detrimental and toxic, whereas the feminine counterparts are not. Well, this can just as easily be proven for feminine traits as in regard to thinking that what is something that's been associated culturally to femininity as, say, passivity or more shyness or quietness, somewhat, as being positive. No, that's detrimental as far as I'm concerned. This idea that men should adorn in order to combat the mass patriarchal presence that has societally come about going through the millennia up to the modern day. To combat this is to embrace more of feminine attributes as it is overall more positive than the masculine counterparts, this is looking past the very clear problematic, well, not problematic, but when there's not a mix of these in relation to how we look at gender identity, not a mix of actually both of these various gender dynamic traits having positive elements to them, this is a problematic presentation, I think. And it's misandristic oppression towards men. And that's what would be considered, as far as I'm concerned, toxic femininity. The idea that quietness and passivity, this is almost sounding like just condoning subtle submissiveness, is positive, rather than being more, say, assertive, a bit more direct, personality-wise, or some amount of sternness, as if it's inherently destructive. I don't think that's truthful at all. In regards especially to when defending yourself, in terms of more confident personality traits, which I think, as far as I'm concerned, on a psychobiological level, psychologically, is healthy, especially for women. So, and this is something that is shamed, this idea. It's shamed a lot in the far left. Okay, so there's that one. Now what I was saying about the sexual and romantic relations, let me bleed that into the last I'm gonna provide another example after this, for this regard, to touch on the four main demographics that I was speaking about. Now, in regards to the LGBTQ+, and sexuality presentation, specifically in regards to sex work culture and sex work entertainment, and sexual performance, which is inherently tied to that of the LGBTQ+, along with nudist culture. There is a staunch and disturbing adoption of hedonism, of hedonistic sexual philosophy. There absolutely is. It is promoted extensively in the corporate world when praising the LGBTQ+ performatively. And even for smaller businesses that they do it as well, but even just for not in relation to economics at all, the idea of a sexual encounter, of sexual relations, this idea of there is praise of the extremist left of complete and total self-gratification on a conscious level, on a conscious psychological level, for complete and total self-interest in terms of sexual gratification. How do I simplify those terms? There are people who promote the idea on the left of I fuck because I want to fuck, and they fuck me because they want to fuck as well. And we both mutually want to fuck. Therefore, we all come, we all have an orgasm. We're all good. We're all satisfied. It's my sexuality, fuck off. That's what is very highly promoted. This... Okay, let me give, for this one, let me give a personal conversation that I've actually had with a person when I was living in Toronto. I had this conversation with a person who identifies as far left. They identify as far left. At the very least, they hold far left ideals. If they no longer do identify as it, I haven't spoken to them in a long time, nearly a year. I'm trying to. I don't know what's been going on. I had a conversation where... What led up to it? We might have been discussing how when I had revealed to some of my close companions that I wanted to be a future pornographer, a sex worker. We might have been discussing something like that beforehand, and then somehow the conversation led into this. But they asked me the question of, or someone asked, either they did or someone asked the question, okay, guys, answer me this question. If a dude finishes in sex before, like, it finishes quickly, climaxes quickly during sex with a woman, does she have the right to be upset about that, or upset at him about that? My answer to that question was no. No, they morally don't. I didn't say those exact words, but I said, no, I don't think they do at all. They don't have... Okay, yes, legally, they have a right to be upset. Yes. Do they have a valid reason for being upset? No. As far as I'm concerned, from a logical standpoint, coming from a sexobiological point of view, no, they don't. But then this person in the conversation said, no, I think the woman does have the right to be disappointed. And then I asked, why? Or I asked along the rounds, like, why do you think they have the right to be disappointed? And then I said, well, because women physiologically, it takes a lot longer, most often, for orgasm to be reached and for climax, whether it ends in ejaculation or just intensive orgasm for them. For feminine reproductive those with feminine reproductive organs overall, which overall is truthful. So they felt that they had the right to be upset, and they contradicted themselves unnecessarily by saying, I don't think they have the right to shame the guy, but they have the right to be disappointed that they didn't perform longer. I wish I had come back. The conversation trailed off. I don't know how I ended it with. I don't think I made my point clear. But here's my take on that. Do they have the right, in terms of an apathetic psychological response consciously, to be disappointed in the scenario that the intercourse sex didn't last as long? Sure, absolutely. Do they have the right to be disappointed in the guy for that? No. You know why? Because that is fundamentally something neurologically, neuromuscularly, muscularly, in neuromuscular function, I'm going to go with that, that is quite literally something that can't be controlled. Yes. On average, those with feminine reproductive systems, in terms of sexual stimulation, neurophysiological stimulation, it takes a longer amount of time for an orgasmic reaction or ejaculation to occur, most often. And the average populace of cis women, or those who have that type of reproductive, those sex organs. For masculine individuals who have masculine genitalia, typically sexual stimulation and climax does not take very long. It's the same principles, just different time frames, biophysiologically. So the argument they were making doesn't make any sense. Morally, one, and in that, from a biological standpoint, it doesn't make any sense to, one, shame or be disappointed in the masculine partner, because it is something in terms of neurostimulation of the penis that quite literally cannot be controlled. By the way, there are other forms of sex than intercourse. Okay, here's the solution. The guy ejaculates, finishes, very quickly, 3 minutes tops. So, and in terms of revitalizing and re-energizing themselves, because it takes often longer for those of masculine sex organs to regain energy, physical energy, to engage in intercourse again for more ejaculation. Okay, so the guy's finished. The girl hasn't climaxed yet. Anyone up for masturbation? Anyone up for cunnilingus? There's your freaking solution! Anyone up for fingering? It doesn't have to be intercourse. There are other forms of stimulation that can result in climax for the female counterpart. And if coming from the argument of that, agreeing with the disappointment, the woman being disappointed in the man for not lasting as long, because they should have had the right to want intercourse longer. You are a spoiled brat. You're a spoiled brat sexually. I mean it. I'm sorry. You're superficial, and you're a very, very complainative and egotistical, demanding and needy person. if that's the only way you can be sexually gratified in terms of intimate sex with a partner. That's a load of nonsense. Okay, and so that's an actual conversation that I've had. So I think that's completely ridiculous. But something like that will be wholeheartedly defended amongst those who identify as being far left. And in regards to, say, demand of let's say, oh yes, okay, here, defense of, in terms of the LGBT plus, defense of absolutely all sexual actions, or the moral relativist, and you all know how much I hate moral relativism and anti-moralism, how much I hate it. The Because of this, accompanied by the idea from those who are heterosexual or heteroromantic, that they don't have the right to discuss or hold a moral opinion on actions of those of different sexualities, because they're not of that sexual attraction or arousal. This idea that whatever someone in these demographics, homosexual, bisexual, pansexual, scoliosexual, androsexual, gynosexual, omnisexual, etc., 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 or asexual, autosexual. I'm just throwing a few more in here as came to mind, or demisexual. That all activities in any regard they shouldn't be judged for. That it's not the right of hetero individuals to make judgment on the sexual fetishism and attractions of those in the community, no matter what it is. Do I really need to state why that is a recipe for unethical and highly encroaching sexual behavior? Do I really need to say that? I've said it before. But there will be complete defense of this. Okay, let's say as well, if, okay, in, let's say, for sadomasochism, let's say if there's a individual who is very much in promotion of rape play, let's say that. If they're in promotion of rape play, in terms of sexological behaviors, they're in promotion of that. They practice it with their partners whilst engaging in sadomasochistic arousal. And this has been defended. This has been defended by the far left. There will be claims that it's not their right to judge that for their free, liberating expression, there is nothing wrong with them acting this out as long as the partners are all consensual in the presentation, or at least, at the very least, consentful. All forms. Because it's just pretend, right? No. Not only is this... Okay, the play that's going on here is not... very clearly not... I'm not referring to it as if it's... the arousal is very clearly, for this scenario I'm depicting, they are not... the individual who is aroused by rape play, they are not aroused by such in regards to, say, knowing that it's staged. Okay, let's put that on the table, that the arousal isn't just this staged rape play, because this might be the mentality where a lot of those who defend this hedonist sex culture come from, as if, oh, they know it's fake. It's not actually rape. It's not actually the atrocity. It's consensual, because it's agreed upon by both parties. No, that's not what the arousal is. The arousal is depicting this scenario as if it were to be a realistic sexual assault or sexual torture. And let me make this perfectly clear. Whenever, say, someone like me presents this argument against condoning that sexual practice, it's labeled as degradation towards masochism, non-encroaching sadism, BDSM, or just specifically bondage, things of the sort. No, I think masochism, sadism, hardcore sexual practice, or more roughness, or an amount of domination, these are not inherently detrimental. As far as I'm concerned, in terms of sexual attraction, how sexual desires form, one, from my theories, psychobiologically, as I've said before, it's innately all sexual desires come from interactive loneliness. But two, is because of either because of trauma, sexual trauma, familiarity to certain presentations in childhood, and certain common themes throughout their interpersonal livelihoods that weren't inherently detrimental. Okay, let's say for masochism or sadism, I believe that can psychosexually form in an individual because, say, they played rough a lot when they were in childhood, or they did a lot, they say were involved with a lot of maybe more mechanical work, or their family was, or they were, let's say, there's especially studies done in sexology, but there are a lot of, in terms of rural farming cultures of the world, there is high amounts of sadomasochism of individuals who, in terms of sexual relationships, because of working hard days of labor in terms of agricultural production, or things of the sort, or maintenance, or just, again, exploring a local area where there was a bit more maybe harsh conditions, where they got scraped up a lot as a child, playfully, not in any sort of violent or maliciously aggressive sense. That is a way that it can form and can be done in terms of sexual empathy, my theory of connective sexual empathy, in a compassionate and loving way, in an endearing way of trust for sadistic sexual practice, of pain. We shouldn't even call... Okay, I know the definition of masochism is a sexual arousal from induced pain to yourself, and then sadism is the sexual arousal of inducing pain to others. That shouldn't even be called pain, but in terms of the consensual elements of that, that shouldn't even be called pain by that point. That should be... I don't have a word for it, but masochism and sadism should not be recognized as an arousal to pain. It shouldn't be recognized as arousal to pain, because by that point, unless there was trauma, psychological trauma, early in childhood, then that's not pain. The arousal is just rougher stimulation of the nervous system. But anyway, okay. I believe there is definite proof of that, where it can be done consensually, not from this vague argument of, oh, two people are consenting. Because the only argument that the far left friggin' gives, and the far right friggin' gives, for any sexual encounters being morally justifiable is just if people are consenting to it. Not actually looking at what it's condoning in terms of sexual friggin' arousal. But, okay. In this regard, the arousal is not this set-up scenario. It's the idea, the emotional fantasization of that depicted scenario. This is exactly where the friggin', and why I hate the mega corporate porn industry, because they promote rape culture like wildfire. The arousal in this scenario of rape play is the idea of sexual assault. It's very apparent. And those of the far left will condone it, thinking that it's not their right to defame it, because they don't experience that attraction. Yet, because they think as if you can't, that they can't understand the attraction, why it forms. Completely wrong and incorrect once again. So, okay, there's that. And now, for just quickly, because I want to find another location to finish filming this. It's getting a little chilly out. And it might rain soon enough. Okay, so we covered the first three. Race, culture, and ethnicity. Oh, and the religion. Okay, well, we're going to have to skip religious identity. We covered two. Race, sexuality, and gender. Let's do ableism now. There is heavy promotion of the idea that disorders, psychologically, specifically disorders such as autism, and dyslexia. Dyslexia is in there as well, and dyscalculia, more in the modern sense online, or an amount to some degree of schizophrenia, that, or in terms of physiological ailments such as amputation, or amputation of a limb, or 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 a cardiological problem. I don't know, just physiological problems. Certain psychological and physiological problems that there's this promotion that they pretty much cannot be treated, and therefore all actions of those individuals morally are condonable and completely fine, and that the external world around said individual should solely orient itself around their needs and nothing else. Not any part from the disability individual to work really cooperatively with other individuals in the surrounding environment that they're in. And this is especially apparent on leftist TikTok, on the platform TikTok, that nightmarescape of a place that is destroying the human race. Same with YouTube, and Pornhub, and Twitter, and the mega corporate social media platforms that are destroying the human race. For leftist TikTok in regards to the autism community, this is especially apparent there. That autistic individuals, and it's real infantilizing, and those who are autistic who promote it, it's a whole lot of internalized ableism. There is this promotion that because of the emotional deregulation that they were born with, the neurodivergency of these individuals, and how they cognitively orient themselves and are able to perceive the surrounding environmental stimuli, that all actions in how they build systems for organizing the world around them, let's just call it that, is completely fine, and that neurotypical individuals or other neurodivergent individuals, which, let me point out something here, there are very few neurotypical individuals in the world, because people don't count personality disorders and behavioral disorders and certain other mental disorders. People don't count many other psychological disorders as neurodivergency. There are very, very few Okay, let me give you a bit of psychological health lesson in psychology here, in neuropsychology. Any individual who has trauma, who has gained a psychological disorder, is neurodivergent. Depression, dissociation, psychotic disorder, schizophrenia, NPD, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, sociopathy, addictions. Sorry, a bit of my lipstick flew off there. That is all neurodivergent. None of that is neurotypical. Okay, there's a defense that because it is harder, because of the oppressive values of the world around them that do not meet their needs collectively, that all environments around them should conform to their needs with no input from them, with trying to manage and mitigate their symptoms. For specifically, I'm more speaking towards autistic individuals here. That, I think, is completely unfair. That is completely morally unjustifiable. That completely intellectually demeans and dehumanizes those with autism as if they are incapable of critical thought and understanding and constructively building their own orientation of observing the world and collectively working with other individuals, and not solely being allowed socially to just do as they please to help understand the world. I think that completely infantilizes them. And this is something that is promoted on the far left. Same with the physiological ailments, such as say, developmental delay in terms of in terms of psychology and physiology, neurodevelopmental delay, and with cognitive dysfunction or cognitive delay, and say in the case of with certain cognitive dysfunction or delay in Down syndrome, which has the physiological elements to it as well. Or say in terms of Tourette's syndrome, certain tics that are associated to Tourette's, not just the swearing tics, there are other tics, physical tics, that all conceivable symptoms of these illnesses are able to be looked past and condonable. That there is no way for the individual to regulate and control, try and find methods, or just even if they don't succeed, just to try to make sure that they aren't inadvertently harming someone else, even with their ailment, which, yes, can happen. It can happen. And it does happen. Okay, so that's my point for those three. I know I listed four, but three. So for those three demographics that are constantly pandered to in the far left discourse. I'm gonna find another spot to keep recording this because it's getting cold. Well, my things are definitely absolutely drenched as it's completely pouring. So anyway, moving on from the examples of
manufactured double standards of the far left. I want to go into 3 more specific points within the duration of time I have left to speak about this. The first being that in relation to what has more so in the last, it's more so been prominent in far left wing ideals in the last 3 decades, at least within prominent academic discourse in defense of the moral actions and methodologies. This is a very big problem amongst the pseudo-intellectual ramblings of the far-left internet. To any of those who make left-wing, it's not just the far left in my redesign of the political spectrum. This is all across the left. This is all across pretty well the entirety of the spectrum. The rightist column and the centrists as well. This can be found amongst moderate leftists, falling leftists, center leftists, and rising leftists as well. Some amount of it. And it relates in terms of something I mentioned earlier in regards to policing or legal enforcement. To anyone of, especially of the left wing who identifies as an anarchist, stop making stop conflating legal arguments with moral arguments. Even more specifically, stop conflating legality with morality. This is something that, if you know me, boils my blood. I'll make this very quick, this one point, as I already touched on it really earlier. For the most part, societal legalism is not equivalent to provably beneficial moral values. What you deem anyone with the chivalrous bit of higher intelligence can understand that a legal system, a governmental system that imposes laws, the laws of a society are not inherently morally right. They're not condonable ethically inherently. The entire, as far as I'm concerned, being a leftist, the entire, even if the moral ideal behind the law is beneficial and condonable. The governmental enforcement of said law is not at all, as being an inherently controlling and authoritarian system for means of populist control. So I think that one's stating the obvious, but you want examples? Go click on half of the short format commentary content videos in the political sphere of YouTube. Go do it. You'll find the absolute conflation of legal and judicial argumentation with ethical argumentation, which are not one and the same. Okay, that was one. What's another thing? Oh, well, yeah, this specifically. This is something that I want to address, that I've really wanted to address for a long time. That no one else, even those who have criticized the far left, I've seen no one else talk about this. I've seen no one else make this point yet. There will be members who identify as as extremist leftists who defend the ideologies behind them on the grounds that, oh, the reactionaries, well, that's not true far leftism. The reactionary rhetorics that come about in high times of political tension, oh, that's not a true representation of these leaning leftist ideologies. It's not a truthful representation of the values and principles behind them. There are people who make this argument. And this argument has been made going all the way back as far as Karl Marx, in the early Marxists. Now, Marx himself didn't like it. I'll get into that in a second. But in terms of the various organizations in the mid to late 1800s that identified in aristocratic Europe, that were a part of the various communist factions, identifying as Marxist. This goes all the way back in history to that time. It's continued to the modern day. This idea that that's not either that, or just outright saying that the reactionaries are not true leftists. They're just condoning authoritarian right-wing principles. Okay. What are you basing that claim off of? Any far leftists, tell me. What are you basing that claim that that's not inherently rooted in the ideal end goal principles in terms of, or specifically for methodologies of enactment? What are you basing the claim that the supposed reactionaries are not following in line with the outlining of the ideology? Because I've never heard a convincing argument at all for that claim. Specifically because most of the intellectuals, the philosophers, the ideologists who set forth or outlined the ideologies in the first place condone this behavior. Here are some examples. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Okay, let's go with Marxist rhetoric. I've constantly said that I'm not a Marxist. I don't identify as such. Even when I was a libertarian communist, I identified as that. I never had followed completely in line with the political outlining of Marxism. Why? Well, because to put it bluntly, I don't, though Marx's outlinings, obviously his work was fantastic in outlining the mass oppression of capitalism and the need for subjugating a populace and withholding a vital resource for incentivizing them to keep working under a elitist class. I do not think that his structural outlining for his condonement of centralized government. He condoned authoritarian uh, centralization of government, and you can't deny that because that is very apparent in his writings. Not only condoning that for the entire idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat, but on top of that, his step by step process of an integration of from the dictatorship control of the working class and the labor force for socialistic for setting up a socialistic economy, for then hopeful integration into a communist economy for a more equalized redistribution of resources, or in terms of, say, a financial currency that had been set up in a society at a time, with the eventual abolishment of trade currency and thus transition out from centralized government into full social anarchism. I don't believe that even in the time, well, okay, maybe there. I've had this thought somewhat here and there when I've contemplated this. Maybe there was a time long ago, maybe there was a time when in certain geographical locations of the world, in terms of geopolitical structuring, maybe there was a time that Marxistic structuring could have possibly worked in some regard, in some form of, as far as I'm concerned, non-compliant revolutionary tactics. Maybe there's an argument for that far prior back in history. In the modern day, no way. There is no way you can be a self-proclaimed Marxist and have really a coherent and compelling argument for dismantling the oppressive economic structuring of global society. Not with mass capitalist globalization. There's no way. There's no way that, and within that, the mass societal trauma of the world, inducing psychological trauma, there's no way that a set step structure like Marxism is feasibly possible. There's no way. But in terms of Marx himself and Friedrich Engels, in regards to his writing of, specifically in regards to outlining and defaming the idea of a socialist utopia, which both of them did not believe in, despite what Lenin took from their works. Marx specifically, and Engels too, he kind of did. Marx condoned violent revolution. He very clearly, it's not, I know there's in translations of the Communist Manifesto, Das Kapital, on wage and labor. yeah, it's vague of uprising and revolution against an aristocratic, of the aristocratic demographics. It's very, looking back at excerpts from it, it's clear. It's clear. People, a known quote from him is that the working class has nothing, I'm paraphrasing, the working class has nothing to lose from revolting and uprising against their oppressor in taking and seizing control uh, of their labor. They have nothing to lose from seizing power. Along those lines, he very clearly was at most, or okay, at least he was, at the very least, he was not opposed to aggressive, violent revolution. Those of you who are far leftists are most likely praising that, or praising violent tactics. You know, okay, no, actually, first let me keep going with the intellectual figures who outlined what is considered to be far left ideology. Okay, what's another? Okay, let's go with, okay. Here's someone I need to apologize for. In my 8th scientific proposal video, I mispronounced and had been mispronouncing his name for so long. I thought his name was, for my vernacular, pronounced Franz Fanon, but no, it's Franz Fanon. Okay, Dr. Franz Fanon, a prominent intellectual in black social anarchism and a self-proclaimed black Marxist, and proprietor in highly influential in psychology and specifically psychosociology in relation to what we know now, especially in the modern day, as internalized racism. Highly influential in this. I've taken heavy influence from his work, as I've taken from Karl Marx's work and Friedrich Engels' work. Yet, I highly disagree with him on his notion of violent uprising against the oppressor of a white supremacist power structure. Why? Well, my theory of the unempathic, unsympathetic cycle of conflict. As far as I'm concerned, where Fanon was, where it lacked an understanding of how an oppressive class works, of the mass sociopathic personality disorders that are spread throughout the ideologic culture of the elites of the world and ethnic supremacists. The violent actions, as far as I'm concerned, we have seen throughout history, only lead to reaffirmation of an oppressor's tactics. It leads to reaffirmation that the suppressed groups are a threat, that they are violent, that they're a threat to their way of life, which they are. In essence, they are, as they're trying to dismantle this whole demographic that has formed what I call ideologic cultures, a culture around their ideal values. But I mean in terms of their human life, their humanity, see them as a threat, a danger to their obsession for grandiose power. This leads to violent quelling further from the oppressor. And but here's something that a lot of people, especially even those who were in favor of, in non-white demographics of ethnic background, in favor of violent protest against and violent revolt against an oppressor throughout history, who justify it most often do so only under the pretenses of not having or disregarding empathy for and compassion for the oppressor, which is surprising considering that most of these organizations throughout history have taken from Fanon's work as well. And if they've looked through his personal statements, essays he's written, I think you could find amounts of this in Wretched of the Earth as well. Fanon was completely against violence without cause, and thus, and in that, he believed, he has a theory. Dr. Franz Fanon, one of his main theories, outside of, in terms of internalized racism, the black bodies, white mass theory, his psychosociological theory of the collective catharsis, which I believe in. I absolutely believe in, but not in the forms of certain violence that he condoned. He believed that in regards to tactics of violence, specifically in this regard, for a revolt against an oppressive group, he believed that the violent inactions of the oppressed towards the oppressor would thus in turn, and can only be done successfully with empathic gestures, in empathic expressions in that violence. What did he mean? And again, I'm paraphrasing, as I don't have a copy of Wretched of the Earth, or what was the other one? I don't have a copy of one of his essays in front of me. What does he mean by that? He believed basically that the violent inactions and mass years of genocide exacted onto various racial groups from a supremacist ethnic demographic, well, basically, violence is a sort of language, or violence, akin it to somewhat of a manner of speech, of a manner of linguistic expression, one of the emotional sentiment behind, well, why they're enacting it, and ideologically, or culturally at the very least, in terms of European supremacy specifically, of preserving a cultural value. He theorized that violent uprising and revolt from an oppressed group towards the oppressor, and not specific just for ethnic background, that it would lead to, basically, if violent discourse was the only form of speech that they were willing to incite, form of communication between people groups, then this would basically allow them to speak their own language and give them a taste of their own medicine, basically, and empathize with the oppressor from violent tactics enacted against them. That is very clearly what Frantz Fanon promoted. He promoted basically this idea of empathic and sympathetic violence. I know that's a pretty that sounds like a contradicting idea on the surface level, which numerous organizations, as I said, who cite Fanon completely overlook, have historically overlooked. And in essence, me being an ethical situationalist, ultimately, I understand and to some degree agree with where Fanon is coming from, where he was coming from in that idea. I don't think it's a tactic that works on a first attempt, and okay, I do not think violence in the majority of cases, or any amount of immediate attempts at inciting violent, aggressive revolution towards a ruling class, a ruling demographic, or a degradator of any kind, racially, sexually, gender-wise, spiritually, in terms of a religious demographic. I don't think it works especially as a first tactic. But there are rare, very rare, and most often interpersonal cases, I'd say, where when the presence of an individual with extreme psychopathy who is torturous, I'll say torturous to another individual, and basically made their life a living nightmare, violently at that, physically violently at that, not just verbally. There are rare, very rare, and very short cases where basically an empathic violence or assault worked in actually allowing the unempathic individual to somewhat empathize with their victim. There are cases of this where you could cite it, but very few, very rare. And even in that still proves in my theory, as far as I'm concerned, as even though there would be some physical assault enacted, it would still be regarded with compassion in some way, not mere spite. And that is a key thing of Frantz Fanon's work that has just completely been forgotten. It's especially been forgotten historically by various Black Revolt organizations, sadly, and to some degree. Yes, I will point fingers at the Black Panthers. I'm sorry. From what I have researched of the holding and securing of Harlem in, I think it was the 1970s. No, it was the 60s. Late 60s, early 70s, I believe. Okay, one, their leader was a complete narcissist. You can't deny that. And a sociopath. He was a sociopathic narcissist, okay? Towards those of the white demographic. I understand why he became like that. Don't condone it. And it didn't work. Okay, so that's another. It's another. So in the ideology, in that background, Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels to some degree, and Frantz Fanon, all these individuals encouraged, in some regard, violent revolt. So and if you're labeling these individuals as prominent members in far left ideology, which they absolutely are, the argument of that's not true far leftist ideals, it doesn't hold up. It doesn't. Other individuals that I can cite right now in regards to far leftism who have been prominent figures and such. Okay, in regards to Black intellectuals, that's because I'm thinking of Frantz Fanon. This just reminded me, as I listed him in in my scientific outlinings, my proposals. Uh, Coram Torre. Coram Torre, or Chom Stockley was the name he was assigned at birth, but then changed uh, to having it of more African roots. Coram Torre. He was a prominent member of the civil rights movement during the 1960s and 70s. A prominent figure alongside Malcolm X and during the time of Martin Luther King. He lived far beyond the two. But he was a known black Marxist and social anarchist and socialist. And I very much, looking at his talks, because there's a channel on YouTube that I follow called Afro Marxist, and they often upload various historical footage and documentation of Torre's talks. And I absolutely agree with a majority of what he is saying. Sadly, however, he is also predominantly condoned violence. Same with Malcolm X, he did as well. Well, that's one thing that Malcolm X is known for. Promoting. In terms of revolt tactics. Well, I've stated I completely disagree for the reasons I do. And look, I'm going to say it again, as a lot of these figures have it, or have had it. There was a prominent narcissism of a lot of these individuals. Coram Torre was overconfident. Yeah, he was overconfident in some of his ideas. I remember there's one bit of footage where he's discussing the idea that there is no real diversity to the political spectrum. Saying that there is no moral gray areas, basically. He was giving one of his talks where he said of the centrists who claim, or those who he views as centrists, who are just anti-absolutists, who claim that no, there's two sides to this. There isn't, it's not just one way or that way, it's not just black and white. And then the audience laughs, and he has a smug look and just says, you cannot be condoning this behavior. There is no gray area in between. There is merely left and right. If your mother is being raped and you turn your back to the rape and assault that's going on, you are against your mother. I remember that distinctly from the talk. No, Torre, it is more complex than that. Yeah, if you turn your back to your mother being raped, you're condoning it. But if you turn forward and try and defame what is going on, or try and get in between it without causing a violent kerfuffle, or if your attempts aggravate the assaulter and they try and assault you and you don't put up protest and they let your mother go, well, there's a whole slew of gray area in here. And that's not the only iffy thing that Torre has said. And I know I'm going to get flack for this, especially harshly condemning these prominent intellectuals. Well, maybe you shouldn't hail these people as moral gods, because they're not. His overconfidence in that whole statement, it irked me a lot. So, okay, there's another figure of far leftism, especially throughout the civil rights movement, Coram Torre, who condoned those values. Okay, so there's not much to that claim that. Okay, I'm gonna try and think of maybe two more. All right, I can't think of another can't think of another prominent intellectual who. Okay, this individual, another influence to my work, direct influence to my work, my theories. This person has influenced mass ontologic philosophy and ideologies on both the far left, the far right, and the extremist center. And before anyone asks of certain postmodernist intellectuals I could possibly cite, I'm not even touching Michael Foucault. The man was not a far leftist intellectual. He was a far rightist in disguise. But this person, an actual intelligent, the only prominent existentialist, one of the only prominent existentialist philosophers, European philosophers, who, next to Albert Camus, who was one of Camus' influences, he has been one of the only people who has, even more so I think than Camus, made an amount of a convincing argument for he didn't even make an argument for it, but a real in-depth questioning of possible relativism for morality. Take a wild guess who that person is. A person who has both simultaneously influenced the far left, indirectly in some regard, and has been whose name has come under amount of attack from those of far left ideals. Can you guess? Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche is... It'd be interesting to see Nietzsche in the modern world. Actually, it'd be pretty sad. I think with the personality that Nietzsche had, the severe depression that he suffered from for a long while with his existential ponderings, sadly, if he saw some of the individuals he inadvertently created and cultural phenomenons he inadvertently created, he might have, if he could have time traveled to this era, he might have killed himself. He probably, if Nietzsche was alive today, he probably would have committed suicide very fast. Yeah, that's a sad thing I think about. Okay. Nietzsche has been misinterpreted across the spectrum, just across it, for now an entire century. It has been so extensively misinterpreted. With his ontologic examinations of moral values as forming based on human cultural presences, and just an examination of morality as a whole. It's his works, The Genealogy of Morality, and also Beyond Good and Evil, very prominent works, as well as in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. But there have been those of the far left who claim that his ideal of his outlining of nihilism and nihilistic thought has led to condoning morals of some of the biggest atrocities in history. And on top of that, that his observations, and I call them observations, of Napoleon Bonaparte, the mass European megalomaniac, his observations of him and the Roman Empire and Julius Caesar have condoned mass aristocratic and nobility back in feudalist Europe, of noble conquering and noble aristocracy, that his ideals have condoned elitism and far rightism at that. And also have, with his concept of the Übermensch, which I'm not gonna call the superior man or Superman, because here's another, to quickly touch on this, this is a problem that I think where this idea has come from, and that part of this misinterpretation. I don't think the superior man or Superman is a really fair and accurate translation out of German into English of that meaning, of what he meant behind the concept of the Übermensch. I don't think it really is. That might be, it's one key thing of misinterpretation. But anyway, that his idea of the Übermensch has condoned stance of ethnic superiority, or just cultural superiority in general, or of superior human beings. Okay. Not only did Nietzsche criticize the aristocracy of Europe during his lifetime, and examining, especially in Napoleon's time as well, criticizing the essence of an elitist class, that not only that it is literally predicated on the condonement and obedience of the working class, of the peasantries, of condonement of the herd mentality of the populace for its entire existence and predication, and in itself, in the cultural essence of itself, it is only existent within a herd mentality, basically, of elitist groups. Not only did he outline this, did he criticize that, he did not regard Napoleon or Julius Caesar as great mighty conquerors of the weak, like sadly so much of the misogynistic, racist right wing of the internet, the alt-right of the internet, likes to portray him as, because he's for a faction of that online subculture, these white supremacist neo-Nazis who know nothing about Nietzsche and have maybe read like friggin' they've read a paragraph of Beyond Good and Evil and thought, yeah, this sounds right. This sounds like why the lefties want to tear down my Hustler magazine cutouts on my wall. Who have misconstrued him. Okay, Nietzsche only considered, as far as I'm concerned from my observations of his work, in the concept of his historical observations of the cultural phenomenons of those he deemed to be Übermensch, these defiers of, not conquerors, these defiers of the normality, he didn't consider Napoleon or Julius Caesar these great individuals of of ethical value, yes, he's fuzzy on how he actually, whether he's a moral relativist or not. One, he acknowledges the contradiction of not of this the assertions he makes whilst arguing against arguing against absolute morals. He makes the note of the contradiction there of him asserting his own form of morality, basically. I've taken this concept very far in my own work. But he considered Napoleon and Julius Caesar spectacles. These individuals were spectacles of their time period. He didn't think they were these great, confident conquerors of the weak herd populace. He thought that they were individuals who, yes, went against the herd mentality of both the what could be considered at the time left-wing and right-wing demographics of Europe at the time, of the European continent. He saw them as great examples of individuals who, despite their atrocities, were true to themselves, were wholeheartedly, maybe you could, despite very clear psychological disorders of Julius Caesar and Napoleon Bonaparte, you could consider their tactics in relation to some amount of rightist intellectualism, maybe some critical thought. They were highly manipulative individuals. He outlined this as them being basically spectacles of individuals who defied the so-called morality that was culturally assigned, an ideologic culture as far as I'm concerned, of what was common in their time period. That's all it was. Yes, he wrote extensively about Napoleon and a lot of things, but it never, as far as I'm concerned, there's never any actual sentiment that that he was any sort of upstanding individual by Nietzsche's standards. And, okay, as well as, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that? Oh, because, okay, he did not just condone conquerors as the Übermensch. He didn't condone just them as Übermensch individuals. He cited, there was a botanist he cited, who was a prominent scientist at during, I think, the earlier, when Nietzsche was in his youth, he was alive in Europe, Western Europe. He might have been Austrian. And there was also, who else? Okay, there was artists. He also cited artists who, okay, actually, here's an interesting claim as well. Nietzsche is literally quoted as having mass quarrel with his sister's husband at one point, her husband, who was an anti-Semite, highly against Judaism, who in the colonialization of South America, he actually was involved with setting up very crucial religious encampments that were prison encampments, basically. And Nietzsche was highly against this. He thought it was quite unremarkable and a waste of precious time and effort, basically. But the far left, as a portion of them, have taken this idea of Nietzsche as condoning fascistic principles and condoning, basically, in the modern sense, objectivist capitalism, as sadly he was an influence clearly of Ayn Rand. Well, that comes from more a misinterpretation of the right wing of Nietzsche's principles. So, there's that. Okay. I'm going to have to end this soon, so I'm going to address one more thing. One more. It's an elephant in the room that I need to address in regards to this topic. The pro-Palestinian protests. The protests against, in the current time right now, against the Israeli military's mass genocide and complete further pushed extermination of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. The encampments that are happening around the world at various universities. What are my thoughts on it? They're not going to work. How many times in the last 4 years alone has there been mass nationwide protests around the world that are centralized to specific areas and focused on by the mass right-wing corporate media for portraying it as an immediate threat or an immediate prominent event that is going to change the world? How many times has this happened in the last 4 years? This, by the way, is not the first time there has been protests against Israel in favor of Palestine, especially in relation to universities. There were protests held in 2009 at certain universities in the United States. I can't remember which ones, but there were articles published, actually, even by prominent news corporations, about demonstrations held against the actions of Israel in terms of militant occupations within northern portions of the West Bank. And they were quelled with brutal police force. But once again, as the mass media and online social media platforms will, they've pushed this narrative, causing the left, the far left wing, to think that their ideals are being heard, thus causing a mass disrupt on the far right, so that they have their little back and forth, centralizing these mass chaotic events as if it's going to be the coming of the downfall of global oppression. And in 3 months, they're going to focus on something else. Now I'm calling it. The encampments are going to end in 3 months' time. Most of them. Any that remain, which I applaud if they do, I applaud the individuals who are quitting the universities, who are leaving their schools, who are unenrolling or waiting until they get expelled from these corrupt, inherent indoctrination machines, as it's what they are. Oh, here's another thing that's promoted in the far left. Mass promotion of pedagogy, that the systemic educational systems are the only places to actually gain education or any sort of genuine leeway in organizing against corporate elitism or oppressive societal functions or demonstrations against brutal policy enforcement legally. These schools are run by them. and funded by them. I applaud you for unenrolling. You shouldn't have enrolled in the first place. I applaud those who are standing their ground in encampments, even with the police brutality, and waiting until they get expelled. I am not in support of the mass atrocities being exacted upon the students by the police. I am not in favor of the demonstration method of the encampments. And for those of you who are absolutists who claim that you're either with us or against us, well, one, I'm already against you. Because anyone who has the mentality of you're either with us or against us, I'm immediately against your ideological values. But, well, in regards to my lifestyle, you can't claim that for me. You know why? I am now, unlike you, going on 2 years of homeless encampment. I have actively put myself on the streets in defiance of societal control. That is the whole reason I am homeless in the warmer weather. Why I refused all winter to pay any form of rent. Got away with it all winter. This winter. You can't claim it for me. That's exactly why I am out on the streets in the first place. The atrocities that have been committed recently have happened before. Because of stupid people, they will happen again. I don't want that to sound unhopeful because, as I've expressed before and I will express again, there is hope in humanity. I've seen it. We will keep going on. The smart individuals will especially keep going on. But I'll talk more about that in a different video. The focus on Israel and Palestine, the conflict, this mass ramping up of such, will end as quickly as it began, just as the focus on the Ukrainian-Russian war and invasion ended as quickly as it began, just as the focus on the Taliban's re-seizing of control in Afghanistan ended as quickly as it began, just as the killing of George Floyd and the mass protests that went through all the summer of 2020. Oh, wait, no. 2021? Which year that was. Early on in this decade, ended as quickly as they began. And the mass fear over missile strikes from Iran because of the launching of missiles on a convoy in Iraq that was transporting prominent Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Be honest. You all forgot that happened at the beginning of 2020. Right at the beginning. You all forgot about that. So, the chaos will come, the chaos will end. Because stupid people won't, on all sides of the spectrum, won't hear reason. You want to help the Palestinians? Stop buying from Metro. Stop buying a new phone from Apple every 6 months, whenever the next friggin' one comes out. Stop giving TikTok more views than you have to a day. Stop monetizing your content if you're a creator. Stop banking at CIBC if you can, if you have the ability to switch banks, or any other mega corporate banking firm. I currently still use a mega corporate bank. I want and have been meaning to, and when I get the opportunity to, with my finances, I'm going and able to get the right information, I'm going to switch banks as soon as I possibly can to a moderate corporate banking company. Because quite literally, small business banks, they pretty much don't exist in this world anymore. That's an industry, that's one industry that has, the private banking industry, is just like no such thing anymore in almost all the world. I'm sure there's maybe a few obscure ones in certain countries here and there of small banks. Local banks, really local. Like no credit cards, no debit cards, like no online transactions, cash deposit and withdrawal from a teller only. Small exceptions. There are no small banks in the world anymore. There haven't been for decades. Stop supporting them in what ways you can. That's how you can help Palestine. And by going against the corrupt societal forces around you as much as you can. I'm going to show one last thing, then sign off. As far as I'm concerned, this is how the far left views the political spectrum. And this is how the far right views the political spectrum. And this is how the extremist center views the political spectrum. Any of you out there with a frivolous bit of intelligence know that that's accurate. Have a good night.